Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra,
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people.
associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked.
and sometimes what didn't,
You will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts.
And inspire you to do even greater things.
I continue my conversation with Shailaja Venkatasubramanyan. In the first part, she talks about how she got into information systems and her career spanning education and startup sectors. How she balanced professional and personal demands and challenges, and how she never hesitated to get into new areas and is always ready to learn. In this part, Shai talks about the differences in teaching approaches for young adults and children, how she likes to learn when she is interested in a topic and not for grades, etc., and how people learn best when they are invested in it, how she brings a lot of enthusiasm, being funny with a pitch of entertainment that makes her classes always very popular. She also gives interesting assignments, as she says, designing assignments that she would want to do. How she uses a lot of case studies that had a lot of learning value in her strategy classes. And one of the aspects to address in teaching is to manage short attention spans, and how teamwork is important even in academic courses. And then we talk a little bit about the trends and concerns related to the evolving knowledge management space and how AI can influence that. And finally, she shares some career tips. Listen on. So multiple questions. Now, first is whether it is teaching college students or kids. Like you said, you would go and then learn a new topic and you got in there. How do you instill that, say, maybe earning for learning in them, particularly when it is a topic which is supposed to be very technical, analytical, and then no emotions there, etc. That is
right.
The first one. Second is, what is the difference that you've seen, either in terms of the expectations or your own style, when it comes to teaching adults and teaching children?
Okay. All right. So the first question essentially is how do you instill the love for learning, right? And that is, for me, it's actually very, very close to my heart, because I've always learned best when I really wanted to learn, when I was really, not because I was motivated by a grade or motivated by something that was going to happen in the future, but just for the joy of learning. So I think I first experienced that when I was in my master's program. I was taking all these information systems classes with no idea that I was actually going to pursue a PhD in information systems and a career in it. So I thought I was just doing it because I like to do it. I want to learn it. And so I think that was the first time I realized how it feels to just learn for the sake of learning with no expectations of anything at all. And so I think after I learned that, then I went to do the PhD program. For me, the other thing was that I was so grateful to be in the PhD program, honestly, because I was someone who had wanted to study engineering and had taken this long route, circuitous route, to get to a point where I could finally do what I wanted to do. So honestly, just the fact that I was there, I was extremely grateful for that. So I think one difference I could see between myself and, say, a guy, I won't name him, but an IITian, was that he was already focused on publishing papers and all those kinds of things. And I was there to enjoy the program, honestly. So, and because I was there to enjoy the program, I didn't hesitate to, just venture off into new fields like remote sensing, even though I knew nothing in that field. So anyway, so talking about instilling that in other people. So in college students, I found again that people learn best when they're invested in it and when they're really enjoying what they're doing. So it's a little like, so first of all, I bring a lot of enthusiasm into the class, because I think that's super important. You can't be dull in class. You have to be funny. You have to be a little bit entertaining almost. to keep people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
And second thing is you have to show uh, the students that you really care about the topic. It's really interesting for you. So when I used to say something like, I fell in love with database management systems the first time I learned it, and people would be laughing, the students would be laughing, and I'd be like, it's true, I really did, I really enjoyed it that much, and but then also seeing that, hey, for them it's a realization that, hey, it is possible to love what you're doing. I would try my best to, see, one thing is success. If they're doing everything successfully in the class, the love for learning follows. Or maybe it's what came first, the chicken or the egg. But if someone's failing a class, they're not going to love the material. So it's super important for me that if someone was lagging behind or something, I would immediately pull that person up, have them meet me during office hours, find out what they hadn't learned, and then make them catch up. And so that was one. And giving them interesting assignments to do. So even when teaching, say, web-based programming, right? You can give extremely boring assignments if you want, or your assignments can be creative and can be fun and can be something they really like doing. So I would actually spend a lot of time actually designing these assignments because I wanted them to be something I would want to do as a student. I shouldn't have to feel like, there's a pointless program I'm writing, God knows why kind of thing. And so, and also the third thing was that I also taught a strategy class when I was at San Jose State. And the strategy class was how best to apply information systems to real world problems. So we used to have a lot of case studies in it. And again, there are good case studies and bad case studies. So I used to pick case studies that were really, really interesting and that had a lot of learning value and that I knew would generate a lot of discussion without any probing. So I've had a few students tell me that they grew to love the subject after taking my class, but I don't know how many students I managed to reach. But I did definitely use that in my parenting style as well. So right from the beginning, whatever the children were learning, I had to make them feel that this is fun, not that this is like onus on you. And the second question was adults versus children. There is a difference. But having said that, the so-called quote-unquote adults I taught were in the age range of 18 to 22. So they're not really adults. They're still in some ways children. But the really small children that come to you to learn, maybe the 7-year-olds or the 8-year-olds, even the 10, 11-year-olds, they have, especially this generation, has a huge attention problem. So the attention span is extreme. I mean, I could tell even in college that over the years, the attention span was coming down. Like the patience to sit through a lecture was not there. You couldn't use a lecture method anymore because people don't have the patience. People don't watch YouTube videos that are more than like certain number of minutes long. So why would they sit in a class and listen to a lecture? So it had to be broken up with activities and so on. And for children, it's even more so. A lot of it has to be completely hands-on from the beginning, but in the hands-on part, you're also teaching them stuff. So their attention is on what they're doing, but they're also learning because you're telling them the next step and the next step and getting them to do it. So that's the main difference, I feel, the attention part of it. But otherwise, as far as motivation goes, I think sometimes younger children are more motivated because for them everything is exciting. And if you tell them, oh, this is something exciting, they just believe you and they sit down and think it's exciting and they want to do it. College students are a little bit more jaded in some ways. So to get them to be enthused about something is a little bit harder. But once you get them enthused, then they get going.
The related aspect is that typically this kind of programming or even designing systems all supposed to be a high IQ activity. Also, stressing on maybe some individual brilliance and something that you need, which is what the education system in general emphasizes. But in implementing some non-trivial solutions, it is always teamwork. There's definitely more than one person who does that. You did mention that you got an opportunity to review others' papers and all that during your PhD period. How do you think teamwork or developing solutions, like you said, strategy, which is probably more of a holistic or design thinking kind of approaches, how can that also be integrated when somebody is learning how to develop IT solutions beyond just programming?
Yeah. So actually, that's something that's I think done pretty well in many of these schools
Mm-hmm.
because teamwork is built in. There's
Mm-hmm.
in fact a requirement. That's one of the rubrics of when you design a course that there has to be teamwork in it. And
Okay.
so, especially information systems, strategy classes, and so on, it's completely with teams. So, in
Okay.
fact, every year we used to take part in a case competition. It was organized by Cisco, and the three schools that would participate were Stanford, Berkeley, and San Jose State. And they would give a real world program.
Hmm.
And then teams at San Jose State had to come up with strategies and business plans and so on. And the professors would pick out the best ones, send them to Cisco. So it was completely team based. So I think, especially, I feel that at least when I was studying in India, teamwork was not common in colleges. Here, at least wherever I've taught, I found that teamwork is very, very common. It's not uncommon at all. And I think that's the way it should be because ultimately they're going to be working in workplaces with other people.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
but then it's not like it's not without friction.
Mm-hmm.
It's every single semester I used to have teams that didn't work out. I would have people coming and complaining about other members of the team. This person's not doing what he's supposed to be doing, and so on and so forth. So which I over time I think I learned how to deal with it. Usually there's one person who's just hoping everyone else will do the work. So I would pull them out and say, okay, you're doing this on your own now, which would come as a bit of a shock to a system, but that was the only way to deal with it, the fair way to deal with it. So I think people learn to work with teams over time.
Normally, these conversations are not very technical, but I do have one question based on what you said, because there is also a topic close to one of my interest areas, which is knowledge management.
Mhm.
Today, you see that from a more traditional document management, which was equated to knowledge management, you find that there are structured, unstructured pieces of information or data that all need to be connected in real time, including the large language models, which kind of spew out based on whatever they collected.
Mhm.
So, again, two questions there. One is, where do you think this will be practically applicable, or are we already reaching the limits? Two is, since there's a lot of talk about data poisoning, now, how do people behave responsibly in interacting with, say, knowledge systems? I don't want to call it AI,
Mhm.
probably labeling it as knowledge systems.
So your second question, can you give me a more specific example of data poisoning?
Um, yeah, see, many of the language models or even the AI models that are being developed are trained on past data.
Mhm.
And due to our systems or just the discipline of maintaining records and having data, there are always some biases that
Mhm.
seem to be in many data sets,
Mhm.
right? So even now, it's probably much easier, to train a model with selective data that it would generate only things that are probably tilted towards one point of view or one way of thinking.
Mhm.
And when this becomes available in the hands of pretty much everyone, and the system start learning based on those interactions,
Mhm.
what are some safeguards, or what do you think we can do to make the world a more understanding place? Maybe it's a little philosophical
Oh, wow.
question.
That's very, very
But yeah,
philosophical.
that too at this time of the day. But yeah, whatever.
Okay, so let me answer the first one first. So,
Okay.
are we reaching the limits of knowledge management? So, so I think there was a point where even though the web was still pretty big, we did have a feeling that yeah, we can manage, quote unquote, manage it. So to
Mhm.
give you an example, the startup that I was working at, we were essentially doing projects for companies like Cisco and Apple and so on. And at that point itself, they had tons of documents. And at that point, of course, it was a million documents was considered to be a lot.
Hmm.
So, and we would of course take a sample of that and train the system to recognize what a document is about based on that and run it on the whole system and fine tune it. And so we had this sense of control that, yeah, so here's the knowledge, we're managing it.
Mhm.
And I think very soon we learned then itself that it's not that easy, because even then Cisco was spewing out products one after the other, which meant more and more documentation, and our systems couldn't keep up. So, but just because the systems couldn't keep up, it doesn't mean that the problem goes away, right? So if they have a lot of documentation and people are looking for the documentation, you still need to find a way to help people find what they're looking for. So I guess it's just, I don't think there's a final solution. You just have, it's even knowledge management. If you do a project, it has to be maintained over time, because it's going to grow bigger, it's going to grow wider, and it's never going to be contained. And especially like you said, there's so much unstructured data now. It's it's just becoming more and more difficult, but it's something we have to do. I mean, because there are uses for it, lots of uses for it. I mean, when there's data and you can use it, obviously you want to find it, right? So, and to find it, you need to manage it. So definitely, I don't think, I mean, it's not possible to quote unquote manage, but we have to definitely find ways to cope with the data as time goes by. And the second question was about data poisoning. Well, honestly, I don't know much in this area because I haven't really thought about this much. The only thing I know is that because my niece, she works for Alexa, and so we have conversations sometimes about how Alexa is trained. And definitely, even the way Amazon itself trains it, there are so many biases, right? So, and then when you think about AI systems that are exposed to the world, where it's getting data from all and sundry, some of which may be completely false data for all we know, there will be issues, right? But if we have AI systems that affect our lives in some crucial way, there has to be safeguards. Otherwise, we are done for, right? Of course, you can't have manual safeguards. You have to develop AI-based safeguards that can detect. But again, this is going to be like a perpetual race between people who are producing the fake data and the people who are trying to detect it. So there's no end to it. Just like there's no end to knowledge management, I think there's no end to this either. But I think that's what makes it exciting. But I also hope we don't end up in some kind of scary situation because of that. So because I don't want to think of the consequences of what could happen, but it is pretty scary sometimes.
Yeah, in a way that I think probably offers hope and scope for people to get into IT. So I usually like to conclude my conversations with some career tips that I guess might have for two segments of people. One, those who may be considering a career in IT, in whichever area, and those who have been in IT and going through possibly an existential question or trying to address that, saying that, what am I doing here? Should I change? Or how do I stay abreast of whatever is happening?
Right.
Do you have any tips for both?
Yeah. So for the people who are considering careers in IT, IT is pretty broad, right? So it can be one end of IT, which is very CSE. You're writing like, system level code and so on. And then you have the other end, maybe it's a business analyst who's basically designing, collecting data, interviewing people and designing systems. So in either case, so I've had a few chats with my former students, because they sometimes come back and they say, okay, I'm thinking of making some changes in my career. What do you think of this? Because now it's so important to insulate your career from, I won't say it's not possible to insulate, but protect your career from these big changes that are happening, right? So for instance, my son is majoring in CS. Now, I definitely don't want him to have a goal of being a programmer, because definitely the programming job itself is in danger already, right? So he has to be someone who is designing stuff and designing something that at least right now AI cannot design. So so it's really important to look at what problems exist right now that are not being addressed or being addressed very minimally, and train yourself to go after that. So one thing, for instance, the space exploration is taking off, right? And one part of space exploration is the robotics angle to it. And robotics involves programming too, but there's a lot of designing of hardware and software over there. So, so for instance, that's what I've told my son. So he likes that kind of stuff, and even the project he's currently working on has something to do with both hardware and software. So essentially, training yourself in places that where you cannot be easily replaced. And right now AI itself, it seems like the safest place to go because you're the ones who are putting other people out of work. So but again, I think IT stuff changes so fast. It's not enough to just say, okay, I'm going to do AI or I'm going to do data science. You cannot just sit on your laurels because things change so quickly around here, which actually is connected to your second question. Because in order to stay relevant, you have to constantly be on the run. It's like running to stay in the same place. You have to be constantly training yourself, learning new things, which is actually a challenge for people who are doing full-time jobs because they're doing full-time jobs where they're focusing on one particular thing. And then to have to say, okay, now outside of this job, I need to get skills that are not relevant to my current job is a very, very tough thing to do. And honestly, for most people, life comes along, right?
Sure.
You don't, it's not always like in your youth where all your time is yours. You have spouses, you have children, you have parents, you have illnesses, you have so many things that happen, right? And so over time, if you can keep up that pace, that's awesome. But I think ideally what one should, I don't know whether I should use the word should, but it would be a good thing to do because if you really care about technology, it really interests you, you feel enthusiastic about it, but just can't keep up with the nitty gritty stuff, is to go on to, like for instance, my husband, he set up opened a startup, right? So the startup, the people who found the startup, they have the big picture. They say, okay, this is what we're trying to make. This is this is the approach to this is how we want to solve this particular problem. And then they start getting people to do work for them. It doesn't mean that they know nothing, but it also means that they don't have to keep themselves abreast at the rate at which they would have to if they were actually doing all the programming themselves. So, and the other thing is that when you have juniors who are coming in with all those new skills, that's what better way to learn, right? You can learn from them.
Yeah.
Right. That's a great way to keep yourself abreast. The other option is I have another student who wants to go off into teaching, which I said, great, do it. But again, teaching is also a place where you have to keep training yourself and retraining yourself if you're teaching in the IT field. I mean, except if you're teaching history or something, you have to keep yourself up to date. Not just because things change, but because the nature of the students that come in change. Because every generation is different from the previous one and seems to know more than the previous one. So even there, you have to keep yourself abreast, but it's a change of pace. When you're teaching, the pace is not that of the frantic, frenetic corporate pace. It's slower and you have time to adjust. So that's one thing. But I do know a lot of people who are so burned out in technology, they're like, we're done. We just want to do something else altogether. And I know people who've gone off and become yoga instructors and so on. But I guess that for that, you also need to have the freedom of, you need financial freedom to do that. So if you have to bring in a stable income and you're supporting a family, then you will have to work at something you probably have some kind of training in, right? So it's not that easy to get away from technology if you are still trying to make a living, if that's all you've been trained in. I mean, that's my perspective, because if you want to retrain yourself, again, that takes time. So what's going to happen to your income source during that time, right? Unless you can do that parallel with whatever you're doing. So it does become harder as you grow older to change. But maybe you could slow down by uh, going into teaching or something else.
Yeah, those are very pragmatic tips.
Yeah. Yeah,
Take it off
because
of where you
my
are.
students come, because when my students come to me, I have to give them pragmatic tips. I can't give them fancy tips, and they'll look right through it. They'll see right through it. They'll see it's not going to work for me. I have to earn money,
Yeah.
So you have to have work for them the way they live right now. So, and they do want to get married. They do want to have children. So I have to like be very practical with them and say, okay, here's how your life's going to be from this point on. you're going to have less time to learn new things. Because of course your family needs attention. So you have to work around that. And of course, you have to basically prioritize for yourself what's important as well. Because I've had to do that a few times in my life when I had kids, when my parents were sick, and so on. Sometimes you just have to be very clear about what your priorities are and just go with it.
Yeah. On that note, thanks a lot, Shailaja, for
Sure.
sharing your very
Absolutely.
inspiring story.
Oh,
I'm sure a lot of people would be able to relate to it. At least I could, on multiple instances that you were talking about. Thanks a lot.
thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for talking to me.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.